Thank you. Welcome to this meeting of the Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee being held on Wednesday, the 10th of July, 2024. A few bits of housekeeping before we begin. For those present in the meeting room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way by the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on Herefordshire Council's website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. For participants in the room, please use the microphones to speak, pressing the button on the right of the unit, and please speak directly towards the microphone, otherwise your contributions may not be picked up on the live stream. Please ensure that mobile phones, laptops and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, provided that it does not disrupt the business of this meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that any such person filming or photographing may be made aware. There are some procedures and etiquettes for this meeting, which is that only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. I think we do have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants. Can I request that they use the raise hand feature within the system if they wish to contribute and to introduce themselves when they are called upon. Right, moving on with the agenda. I think apologies for absence to begin with. I think apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Roger Phillips. And I think there are named substitutes. In Councillor Dave Davis is presented as the substitute for Councillor Roger Phillips. Thank you for coming in today, Councillor Davis, much appreciated. Declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare any interests in any agenda item? No, thank you. Moving on, section 4, minutes. To receive the minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, the 27th of February, 2024. The minutes are in the document on pages 13 to 20 of the papers for today's meeting. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Can I ask all members of the committee present if you are content that I sign the minutes as a true and accurate record of events that took place? All those in favour? Yeah, all those that were present have agreed. I think we made a note of that. Sorry, any against? Any abstentions? 2 abstentions on the basis that you weren't here. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. Can we make a note of that, clerk? Thank you very much. Do I need to sign the minutes now?
We can do that at the end.
We'll do that at the end. That's fine. Item 5, well, we're cracking through. This is good. Item 5, questions from members of the public. To receive any written questions from members of the public. A question has been received from a member of the public, Mr. Peter McKay, and a response has been published in supplement 2 to the agenda. The questioner has the opportunity to submit a written supplementary question or to join the meeting to ask their supplementary question. Can I ask the clerk to confirm if a supplementary question has been asked?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mackay has confirmed he does not have a supplementary question to submit, as he intends to bear a question to the Environment Sustainability Scrutiny Committee instead.
Yeah, my understanding is that the question actually pertains to matters that are more appropriate to be dealt with by that committee. Yeah, which is fine. Thank you. Questions from members of the council. To receive any written questions from members of the council. No questions have been received from any councillors on this occasion. Right. Section 7, affordable and social housing in Herefordshire. To consider an overview of affordable and social housing in Herefordshire. A report has been presented, and I understand that the Housing Operations Service Manager, Sarah Woodhouse, is joining us remotely and will be talking us through this presentation. So very happy to hand over to you, Sarah, if that's okay.
Good morning, thank you very much. So affordable housing in housing need in Herefordshire is the presentation today. This is not a new policy, but a governance structure under how we already procure B&B hotel accommodation for use as temporary accommodation. Next slide, please. So an overview, what is affordable housing? Where are we now? Where have we got? And what do we need to do? So what is affordable housing? Sorry, next slide, please. Sorry, go back. I didn't realise you'd. Affordable housing includes homes for sale or rent and is for people whose needs are not met by the private market. There is often confusion in the council between social housing and affordable housing. The term social housing has been legally broadened to include homes many people cannot afford, such as affordable rent and even low-cost ownership products. Often affordable and sociable are used interchangeably, but traditionally social housing is social rented homes, the cheapest form of accommodation available that is truly affordable. Social rent is always the tenure that housing negotiate first, as it is our greatest need. Next slide, please. So affordable housing tenures, so what are they? So in the rented sector, we have social rent, affordable rent, rent to buy and intermediate rent. We also have home ownership, which is shared ownership, low cost market discount and discounted market, and first homes. I've obviously explained social rent on the previous slide, which is the lowest form of tenure rent and set at below the average rent figure in the UK, and it is the lowest form. Affordable rent is set by the government using a formula, and rent increases are capped. Rent to buy is a tenure whereby the tenant signs up for a tenancy for 5 years and in that time saves the deposit to then purchase the property as a shared ownership property. Low cost market is the council's tenure that is truly affordable and discounted in line with the incomes in the county. Discount market is the government's version of low cost market, but discounted by a minimum of 20%. First homes is the new discounted tenure that government have introduced on Section 106 developments intended for first time buyers. Next slide, please. The current housing situation in the county. There is a shortage of affordable homes and a cost of living crisis. The council have all the statutory duties but no powers. We have 1,957 people currently on the waiting list for general needs affordable housing. 67 households on the accessible registered for wheelchair accessible accommodation. Additional needs for learning disabilities, mental health, gypsy and travellers, older persons and children's services. 120 households in form of temporary accommodation arranged by the local authority, a 100% increase on pre-pandemic levels. In 23-24, temporary accommodation cost the council approximately 3.5 million, with an overspend of 1.3 million. There are currently 18 individuals who are street homeless and provided with support. The use of B&B hotel accommodation is an important tool in the suite of temporary accommodation provision, as it allows greater flexibility, especially whilst the council investigates and assesses a household's application. It is, however, costly, between £90 and £130 per night, and politically sensitive issue. Due to the high level of demand for temporary accommodation, the council are heavily reliant upon this form of accommodation to supplement existing supply. Expenditure against B&B hotel costs could be offset by securing housing benefit payments and use of the homeless prevention grant and discretionary housing payments against these costs. Applying for housing benefit against B&B hotel accommodation and in general against all accommodation, especially supported accommodation, is very difficult, time consuming for officers and not recoverable to Housing Solutions budget. Instead, it's being paid into corporate accounts. Temporary accommodation is provided as a statutory duty by the local authority and complements a range of other accommodation offers. Temporary accommodation is offered to families who have been assessed as homeless and needing housing support, or under investigation taking place to establish that need. This is part of our statutory duty to accommodate people who are homeless under the Housing Act. The council offers a range of temporary accommodation solutions. These include homes that are owned and managed by registered providers of social housing, allocated specifically for temporary accommodation, properties leased from private landlords, managed directly by the temporary accommodation team, properties owned by Herefordshire Council, and B&B hotel accommodation purchased on a nightly or weekly basis. So who delivers services in Hereford? Housing Solutions, the operational team responsible for homelessness, temporary accommodation and outreach support. Home Point, who hold the housing register, which is a choice-based letting system in Herefordshire. Strategic Housing, negotiate and deliver affordable housing. Write off and publish the write and publish the housing related strategies and bid for grant funding, and registered providers own and deliver affordable housing. We also have charities in the private sector own accommodation and private support services. Next slide, please. How we deliver additional housing in the county. As a local authority, we do not hold stock, and therefore we're reliant on our registered provider partners and private developers to build appropriate housing and meet the council needs. We must have strong evidence base and good understanding of what housing we need and where we require the housing to be situated. We need to be proactive and understand our future needs, that we can plan for future developments. Through the planning system, however, it takes a long time to bring a new housing development to start on site, and there are usually several processes such as pre-app advice, outline full planning, reserve matters, start on site, and practical completion units delivered. Grant funding received from DLEP for specific projects to purchase units of the open market, working with and providing and supporting private landlords and charities, and bringing empty properties back into use. Next slide, please. These are the delivery figures for 2019 to 2024. From April 2019 to March 24, strategic housing have supported and enabled a delivery of 1,447 affordable dwellings. This is broken down into Hereford City and Market Towns of 1,227 and rural areas of 248. Delivery has been through various means such as Section 106 delivery, 100% registered providers affordable sites, and property acquisitions by the council. The council have also brought back 149 empty properties back into use through advice and assistance. I'm not going to go through the table with you. The 3-year pipeline of 1,475 additional affordable housing providers negotiated. Variety of completed schemes. So these are examples of some of the schemes we have completed. So veteran self-build in Leominster, 20 dwellings, of which 9 are for veterans. That should say conversion, not conversation, apologies, of a council property to create 6 self-contained apartments for homelessness. 2 further properties are in the process of conversion. We've purchased 12 one-bedroom dispersed homeless accommodation units, funding to purchase a further 9. We've purchased a chalet for a traveller family with a terminally ill family member. We've purchased and refurbished a property to provide 4 self-contained apartments and a crisis pad for children's services. We had a new extension and refurbishment of the homelessness night shelter, including siting of 2 pods. And we have long-term leases with private landlords for temporary accommodation. Next slide, please. So setting the context. Did you know that Herefordshire is 841 square miles with a population of 190,000? The median age in Herefordshire is 44, which is higher than any other area in the West Midlands and the rest of England, both at 40. Average gross salary is 29,900 compared to 33,176 nationally. Average house prices for Herefordshire 294,000 compared to 310,000 in England, 217 in Wales and 185,000 in Scotland. There is a north and south county divide for 310,000 and 248,000 respectively. House price affordability in Hereford ratio is 9.8, almost 10% compared with 8.3 nationally and 7.2 for the West Midlands, and we're the worst of the 14 West Midland authorities. Did you also know average private rental is £967 for a 3-bedroom property? Approximately 12,500 affordable properties in the county. 1 in every 7 households lives in social rented accommodation, which is 13.7% of the population, compared to 18.8% living in private rented accommodation. We have one of the highest proportions of detached dwellings in the country, and we have one of the highest rates of households without central heating in the country. We're also in the middle of a housing crisis. We don't own our own housing stock. Numbers of people becoming homeless are increasing, and the government funding is due to cease in March 25. Next slide, please. What are we doing about it? So we have strategies setting out strategic vision. We have a delivery programme of additional accommodation, a single framework for suppliers of temporary accommodation and B&B accommodation, Prevention, we're having a strong focus on the prevention and early contact with people at risk of homelessness. Developing a multi-agency approach, a member of the National Making Every Adult Matter network. Developing a trauma-informed approach to working with our client group. We're developing a pool of experts by experience to support our strategic direction and prevention. The following process to purchase temporary accommodation were considered and discounted. Many competitions would add an administrative burden and would not be quick enough to respond to the emergency nature of the service. Dynamic purchasing systems were considered, but were deemed to be too labour intensive for the temporary accommodation team to administer on top of their existing duties. An open invitation will be sent to RPs for the provision of housing for temporary accommodation. In recent years, attempts to make arrangements with our RPs have not worked. There is no legal requirement to procure housing from registered providers for temporary accommodation, as there is no direct cost for this service. Likewise, strategic housing are constantly working to secure new private landlords to reduce the cost of B&B and hotel usage. Risks were identified by our providers. Some suppliers were consulted about this policy. Process expressed concern about the paperwork involved. Our temporary accommodation team and our commercial services team, there, however, are able to help with this process, which is once per 4 years with an annual refresh of policies and licences. The framework is reviewable annually, and this is an opportunity also to reopen the tender at this point. All households placed in temporary accommodation, including B&B Hotel, have a named case officer who works with them to develop a personal housing plan, register for Home Point and bid to secure permanent tenancy. What do we need? We need access to accommodation where we have full control and can manage. This will enable us to meet our statutory functions, deliver accommodation to the most vulnerable and reduce the spend on temporary accommodation in the private sector. Next slide, please. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. A lot to take in quite a short space of time, and quite sobering, actually. I think all my colleagues would agree. Yeah, we'll go around the table. Yeah, if you've got an urgent question, Councillor Baker, by all means. Yeah. No, but you put your hand up. Would you want to carry on?
I'm just wondering, we obviously receive grants from central government towards various types of housing. I'm wondering, with the change of government, whether those amounts that we receive will increase or in fact reduce. Do you have any thoughts on that?
At this stage, I don't know if we're informed enough to know if they will increase or decrease. We are expecting a reduction from the previous government come March 25. So I think negotiations will start now, and we will lobby certainly for more money. More money is always needed, and to Labour government, they have made a commitment for more housing. So our hope is that we would receive more money.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. One of the things you mentioned was that the need for a strong evidence base and a good understanding of what housing we need and where we require that housing to be situated, which I think is really important. I'm guessing that refers to the housing market needs assessment.
That's right, yes.
Can you let me know how up to date is that assessment?
I think it's fair to say that assessment is not as up to date as we would like it to be, and therefore it would need to be reviewed.
Okay, when was it last done?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can get those figures that date to you.
Could you? I think it's...
Yes.
Sorry, yeah. Roger, if you want to come in.
It was finalised about 2 years ago, I think it was, but it feeds into the local plan development as well as it's one of the evidence bases. So when we were looking at the local plan, the land use kind of provision for the next kind of 10 to 20 years for the county. So we will be looking at how we can refresh that data soon in order to help take the local plan forward. I guess slight caveat to that, a bit like the question from Councillor Baker. So Labour government have committed to reviewing and changing the planning framework, so we just need to understand what impact that will have on the local plan development. But it is one of the things we've identified we need to do is to refresh that work in order to inform the local plan and the housing services at the same time.
And is there a planned timeline for that? As we
I could check with colleagues. It was planned to be done to be refreshed over the course of the next kind of 6 months or so as we took the local plan forward. We just now need to understand what the implications are for the government change on the local on how we develop and sign off a local plan.
I completely understand. I mean, I think it's going to put some things in limbo for some time, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the things I noticed, Sarah, when you gave those bed and breakfast stats, they were particularly interesting, and there was some very high costs involved with those figures as well, and they weren't actually detailed in the presentation. Those particular stats. I don't know about my colleagues on the committee, but I would really value having if you have a written presentation with all those stats on it. Could I ask for that to be circulated? Is that all right,
Yes, certainly.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Because I think that would be quite valuable if possible. Thank you. I wanted to ask you a little bit about capacity to do what you're doing at the moment within your department. How much are you held back by capacity?
I don't think it's any secret that we are under-resourced. We feel under-resourced at the moment. We are obviously going through a huge period of change, with change of management structures, etc. We're reviewing the resources that we have, and working where we can in a much smarter way. Having said that, there is a gap, and I don't have a resource currently to do it, so we are working on that, whereby the resources to help and facilitate people to move on from our temporary accommodation into either their own accommodation, supported accommodation, there is a gap there, and that's because our housing solutions team are working in prevention more than we've ever done before, and also at relief stage as well, so supporting people when they become homeless. We also have the temporary accommodation team, a very small team. When I say very small, we look at our team overall, there's almost 50 people, but when you break it down to the individual teams, they are quite small. So the delivery temporary accommodation, when we have approximately 80 units in B&B, approximately 46 dispersed accommodation across the county, and 3 officers to deliver that support, it becomes quite difficult for them to do that intent. So what I would really like us to do moving forward, and I'm moving forward with Hayley on this, is to have a dedicated resource to get people out of B&B accommodation, out of our temporary accommodation, because we have a limited resource anyway, and move them through the system much quicker, as they're effectively bed blocking. So our resources, I would say, we do work very as smartly as we can with the resources we have, but I don't believe the resources have the capacity to take on any more workload at this current time, which is creating this hole, as I've called it, where we haven't caught this cohort of customers. Not to say they've been left, just that they haven't had the intensive support that I feel they need to move them on to independent accommodation. And also we need I think we need resources in terms of funding to help incentivise private landlords. We're in a market at the moment in Herefordshire where private rental properties are going on the market and snapped up instantly because there's so few of them. We're competing against those people, and we're not getting private landlords on board very quickly or very easily. We don't currently have an incentive program for them, other than the fact that we are a guaranteed rent for them over a period of time. We will manage the property, we maintain the property. But if a landlord can get, for example, there are 3-bedroom properties, I know I've given you the medium, but there are 3-bedroom properties for around £1,200 a month. We pay around £850 a month for a 3-bedroom property. And local housing allowance, housing benefit doesn't cover all of the rent. So there is a huge disparity between private rents and us being able to take on properties through the private market at the moment. Hence, we are bed blocking at quite a few angles.
So just a little, yeah. There's a lot to take in there, and I'm aware Councillor Toynbee wants to come in a second. I just wanted just a bit more clarity on that. So when you say incentivise private landlords, are you saying that at the moment we're only paying effectively 66% of the market rate for a 3-bedroom property? That's our going rate.
Yes, so it is a negotiation with the landlord, so that isn't set in stone. We kind of test the market, we test the waters, if you like, when we're negotiating with a private landlord, and we will meet them. So if they say they've got a figure in mind, we'll come in at probably at a lower figure, but it is around 60-70% of market rate, but we guarantee that rent. We take on the property for a period of 6 years, and we have maintained properties to a standard that they're handed over to us in. So in that respect, there's an incentive there because we will manage the property in its entirety for them and hand it back in the same condition. But we don't incentivise in terms of, you know, a finder's fee of £500, for example, which I know we've done in other areas, or we don't offer them, you know, a package at the end where we'll increase the value of whatever that is, you know, through wear and tear. We won't increase that property to that value. So there's some things that we could probably do to incentivise landlords more. And I haven't done enough research. I've only been posted a very short amount of time. But the research around our neighbouring counties as to what that looks like in terms of bringing private rentals on board. But I think we do need to try and bring on many more, or we need to be bringing on our own properties that we can manage ourselves. I think that would be key for us, is managing properties.
I think that's interesting. But that also impacts on, again, the capacity within the department to manage those properties, doesn't it?
It does, but if we were to charge a social affordable rent, then obviously through a means of any service charge, we could make those properties self-funding, so that staff could then be brought in to manage those properties. We could have, currently we outsource a number of our properties to RPs. We don't have control over although we have a nominations agreement, our RP colleagues are excluding some of the cohort of customers that we are currently dealing with. So, for example, their allocations policy will exclude many of the cohort. They're also introducing credit checks, which, as we know, that a large proportion of the people that we deal with would probably fail credit checks. Therefore, I think the type of accommodation that we need to bring on is that more sustainable accommodation, so that we can move people through much quicker and be able to sustain accommodation going forward. And that's only through managing our own units. So if we can do that, we can develop and grow our own.
Thank you. Councillor Toynbee.
Yes, thank you for the presentation, and that answer was very helpful. I've got one question about for clarification about social rent, because the picture is so complex. I assume that's housing associations, but that's the question. And then from the point of view of the work of the committee, you know, in my mind, sort of temporary accommodation and supporting people who are homeless, which is, you know, which we do well, and is an important part of our work as a council, in my mind, is sort of separate from affordable and social housing. And I know everything's connected, but I'd just like sort of, there was a lot of focus in the presentation on temporary accommodation. So I suppose I'd just like a bit of clarity. Maybe we've yet to decide what we're going to focus on in terms of the work of the committee. Thank you.
I think in terms... Sorry.
I was just going to explain social rent is as you said, RP registered provider accommodation, and affordable rent is set by the government.
I think as far as the committee is concerned, yes, there was quite a lot of emphasis on the bed and breakfast side of things, but at the moment, I think we're trying to get a general overview of the whole of the situation in the county, and everything is interconnected. And I think if we can make recommendations, which I don't believe we'll be making until October when we've had the final report, then if there is crossover, then we'll certainly talk either through the Scrutiny Management Board or with our colleagues in other committees, where if we have views on particular issues that we feel might be more suitable for their particular remit. But I'm not going to get bogged down in other areas, and we will seek clarification between now and the final report coming in October. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask, have you been able to identify empty properties within the county that could be utilised? They might be privately owned or maybe even council owned, that could be used for accommodation, and therefore consequently a cheaper option than constructing or building specific properties to help us in the housing situation that we're in at the moment?
So there are a number of empty properties within the county. My previous role actually was in empty properties. That it's not quite as straightforward as bringing those back into use through the council. My experience of dealing with empty properties is there's a very lengthy process in terms of there's a huge number of properties that are not registered in our county, because pre-1980 you didn't need to register a property. Also, there have been deaths of people that would have owned those properties. So then they become, I can't think of the word now, but basically they go into the Crown, and therefore then a process has to take place to bring them back into use. Whilst during my time as working with empty properties, my experience of the owners of empty properties is that they weren't willing to work with the council in terms of us utilising the property. They wanted to bring the property back into use themselves and use it for their own means, but they just couldn't afford to. We did offer grants at that time, but that would have been for us to take the property on and manage it using our housing register. So a number of people who have got, this isn't by far or everybody, but we have explored that option of trying to bring properties back in to use for our own means, and it so far hasn't been well met by those property owners. There are enforcement actions that we can take through our environmental health colleagues. However, those actions are empty property dwelling management order and also compulsory purchase order. They would be years in the making in terms of gathering evidence and substantiating it and then going to court. And so far we haven't been able, I think we've done one in the last 10 to 14 years that I'm aware of. And therefore that process is very lengthy and not a quick fix. And I don't think empty properties would be a quick fix for this, because the process involved in bringing an empty property back into use is so complex, with so many different strands to it. And we do attempt to. So we have an empty property officer who will work with landlords, and where possible, if a landlord wants to work with us, then she will, owner occupier, then she will put them in touch with us to possibly look at refurbishing it and bringing the property into use.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Hitchener?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. An enormous amount of information, and each page presented a number of questions in my mind. It was difficult to explore them all. Just first of all, perhaps Chair doesn't understand what outcome we are looking for from this meeting, and I'm just wondering, we're asking lots of questions and detailed questions, and I'm wondering whether, Sarah, your expectation is you're going to prepare a further paper which will address a lot of the questions and principles we're asking, which then feeds into the meeting we have in October. So I'm just wondering what your expectation of and perhaps what the Chair's expectation is, because I think part of what I'm going to ask in a moment is just kind of additional questions that you might want to consider. So I was thinking in terms of second homes, what's the impact of second homes in our county? But
the additional, Chair, yeah. the original plan was that this was to set the context for us all and get us up to speed on the situation as it currently stands prior to us receiving the report on national policy in order to feed in recommendations to Cabinet in October. However, if this committee decides it would like to have some additional work undertaken between now and then, which could complement the work we're going to be getting in October, then I don't think that would necessarily be a problem, and could be one of the recommendations that we ask, one of the requests we make at the end of this meeting.
Thank you, Chair. That's very helpful. Because Sarah, you're the one who's on the ground. You have all this information, and even from the presentation you've come up with, you've obviously got lots of ideas. You've thought about what we are doing, what could we be doing. I think you've got a huge amount of information, which is presented in a slide pack rather than a written document. You're going to hate me, aren't you, for suggesting you have to write down everything you're putting in here. But we're asking various questions and perhaps trying to find holes and other ways of approaching things. So I was interested to, what is the impact of second homes in our county? How many are empty? I mean, we're going next year to be charging people double, which where's that money going to go? Question mark. Perhaps it should be going towards housing and helping your particular element. That's a political decision, I guess, when the budget round comes around. But you might have some idea, how many homes are empty. And I know there's a big issue in Cornwall, isn't there, with second homes, and that's having a huge effect. And Airbnb, what's the impact on that? And another question I've got, you mentioned the number of houses found in town areas and rural areas, and the rural was quite small, and that's housing provided. But where is the demand? Is there a demand in the rural areas for housing, or is it mostly in the cities. So sort of, I've got a number of questions which, if you were to write a report, you might be sort of writing down now all the things which you might, we've got some other ideas which you wouldn't have yourself. Chair, I hope I haven't opened a bag of worms on that, but
Not at all. I think all very valid points. Do you want to come back on that, Sarah?
So in terms of second homes and the charges for second homes, I would need to refer to my colleagues in council tax, because that is recoverable from them, and unfortunately the data received by the empty property officer doesn't go into the detail of this is a second home, this is an Airbnb, so that person has to do that investigation if they're able to. So I think our council tax colleagues would have much more information. So not to say that we can't provide you with that, I just don't have it to hand because it's not something that I would deal with, but I can certainly ask them for it for a report going forward. And in terms of demand, that would be shown in the local housing need assessment. So, and as Roger said, we would be looking to review that in line with what the recommendations of Labour, etc. So that is based on need for those areas that we've built or that we've identified build, and that may move going forward. That my experience is the need tends to be more in the city than the rural areas, but there is still a need in the rural areas. Having said that, I am aware that we have some more difficult to let properties in the rural areas because the infrastructure is no longer there, but that's not to say there isn't a housing need there.
Thank you, both of you, for that. I have another question. You presented some figures around the targets for affordable housing, which was, I think, roughly 200 units a year for the last 5 years. And it looked like the targets were nicely met each year on those figures. What that didn't show us is the targets against increase in demand year on year. If those targets showed the increase in demand as well, would they still be quite as positive?
I would suggest not.
That's what I thought. Yes.
Yeah, I would say my suggestion would be that on demand far outweighs our supply.
It would be interesting to see how the year-on-year demand had increased as an additional column to that particular little graphic, so that we could show how we are, whether our targets are in line with increased requests for demand, because I think at the moment that paints a picture of success, which perhaps isn't an entirely true picture of what's been going on. And how were those targets how were those targets originally set? Do we know?
I think they're set by our funders.
They're set by our funders. Okay, thank you. Yeah, Councillor Hitchener.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to say it's a great success that that was a target set and you achieved it year after year. So I think it's a good result. And it represents about 30% of the target that we have set by the government, and they're going to reput about 800 houses a month we're due to build in the county, and the number is about 250 a month of affordable housing. So I think that's about 30%, so I think that's quite a good result. I think the point I'd like to make is that the number on the waiting list is 1,900. And if we build 300 a month, that's 6 years before we even get that done. So yes, the target
300
should be
a year, surely. A year, not a month.
A
month would be great.
Yes, 300 a year is going to take years. And what strikes me about part of your presentation is it's a huge problem. 1,957 people on the waiting list, and we're kind of
1,957 households.
Households, yeah, it's a huge number, and yes, we are doing good things. The housing providers are providing houses at a good rate and affordable housing, but not enough, and we're getting funding from central government for buying properties ourselves, and that's a good thing. But it's trifling. It's such a small thing. So, I'm looking forward to seeing your final paper with some great ideas as to how we close the gap, Sarah.
Well, I'm hoping that will complement the external paper, which looks at the national picture, which brings in lots of different ideas. One of the things I've been looking at, I've been reading the book by the guy that wrote Richer Sounds, who's quite an interesting character as far as social housing and affordable housing is concerned. And one of the things that he puts forward is the idea of a right to buy back scheme. Have you come across those, Sarah?
In this role, in where I'm working now, no. But when I worked in my previous role, yes, we did. We actually did that. So I guess that is something that we could explore. However, obviously we're a non-stock holding authority.
But
So,
we're licensed to hold stock though now, aren't we?
We are, yeah, and we would welcome that. I think. I think it's fair to say, as a housing provider, we would welcome that, and it would give us greater ability to manage our own stock, and therefore allocate our stock appropriately, and not be so heavily reliant on our RP colleagues.
Roger?
Just going to add a couple of things, if that's okay. So there's obviously the figures. So where things tend to get a little bit confused is the difference between social housing need and affordable housing need. So affordable housing is needed. It obviously needed to help people that require social assistance, but also we need housing that can support the workforce that we need to attract people to come and live in the county and to stay here, to fill the jobs that we need for the future. House prices are currently very high. We've had a moratorium across the north of the county for many years, which has slowed down housing development, which has shot up prices. So there's a wider kind of affordable issue around how have we got the right housing and infrastructure that we need to support the economy and the communities of the county kind of going forward, and that's something that we kind of need to work through. I think the paper that we've commissioned we'll look at different models of delivering that, because we can add stock into the small amount the council does hold, but you get to a trigger point where you need a housing revenue account, for example, when you hold more than 200 properties. That's got significant kind of financial and operational challenges then for the council. So there are things that we need to kind of work through in terms of, we've got this big problem. Sarah's outlined really well part of it. There is a bigger challenge we need to have in terms of then how do we have the housing stock we need to take the county forward in delivering a kind of different range of affordable land offers to have families to stay here, to grow the workforce that we need, that we've got an ageing population. How do we have key worker accommodation? How do we have student accommodation in order to support the university? So there's a big long-term need that we need to kind of work through. What that paper will do we'll start to look at what the options are and best practice from other places around the country as to what the delivery model for addressing some of that would be, and that's what we hope to have the debate with you around in October. We do respond and do have opportunities. So the empty properties, there's an empty property on a kind of a house by house basis, but there are larger units that we have developed and refurbed and do make kind of provision or try to make provision for. And we are actually hoping to take a decision through kind of council in this next month in order to provide some money to enable us to respond to some of those opportunities. Because bigger units, vacant units become available, we can convert them to help meet some of that direct need, reduce the temporary accommodation need, and we are looking at how we respond better to that in a more timely and effective way, working across the various different kind of teams in the council.
Can we help with that at all, Roger? Are there hurdles to achieving that we need to explore?
So we are looking at how we can be a bit more flexible than some of the processes we've had in the past in terms of how we amend the capital budget, because whenever we look to do something, kind of take forward a building or a direct provision, it's got to be aligned to the capital programme. That capital programme can only be adjusted by full council and tends to be set every kind of February for the year ahead. And what you tend to find is either opportunities can come up within that time frame where we need to respond, or where government offers grants often for development, it doesn't always meet that annual cycle. So it's about how can we have a flexible approach to the allocation within the capital programme that allows us then to bring forward detailed business cases to respond to that, and that's one of the things that we're working through at the moment.
And that's going to be coming to Cabinet, is it?
So there is a proposal that we're working on at the moment to add a line to the capital programme at full council in July that we're just working through a paper for at the moment.
Great. Okay, thank you. Yep, Councillor Cornthwaite.
Roger, I don't know whether we to prioritise with Sarah that's on the screen, or we can come to individual question. You know that this last week I've asked about the 120 houses on the old Homer trading estate, that where that work has stopped. Are you able to sort of keep an eye that that will definitely go forward the way you've explained it to myself? And if there was any more hiccups or hold-ups, could the council step in and really do something there themselves? That's 120 affordable homes that are half built, and we've got nothing done.
So I think the issue with the one that you described at the moment is that the contract essentially has gone bust during the process of developing out those units, and the registered social provider's gone through a process of trying to find another contractor to take that on, and we believe they've been successful in that, and that work will recommence. There are certainly opportunities for if those situations happen in the future, for how the council can make sure that we don't have half-built kind of housing estates, and how we can help facilitate the development of those kinds of things through working closely with registered providers and others. I think it just depends on at what point you can intervene and where some of the issues are. So if that scheme is essentially kind of commercially viable, and it's the contractor that's gone out of business, the council wouldn't necessarily be able to step in to take over the construction side of things. But if there is a reason why contractors aren't interested in it, whether it's around risk or viability or the approach to it, it's about how we can work with them to help address some of those problems. So there are different models depending on the circumstance. We certainly need to be proactive in working with stalled schemes to take them forward, but the answer isn't always necessarily the council kind of taking over the land and the properties, because we would face those same challenges that the original registered provider and contractor has faced. So it's a case-by-case basis, but certainly we can be proactive in working with, and want to be more proactive in working with, registered social providers and developers in the county to enable schemes to come forward.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you. So, but it sounds like it's good news that it looks like somebody's going to be taking, a new contractor's going to be taking that on.
So from our understanding, yes, the registered social provider's been back out through a kind of a tendering process. We understand the complexity for this one was it was a modular build, so it wasn't just somebody had got kind of half-built houses that another contractor could come in to take over. There were lots of complexities that it was built off-site and that parts of it were being brought onto site, so that's taken a bit more time for them to work through how that could be taken forward.
Thank you, that's very useful. There was one other stat I just wanted to sorry. Oh, I didn't notice that. I do apologise. Sarah, do come back in.
That's good. I just wanted to add to what Roger said in terms of each of our development sites around the county has a dedicated development officer who sits in the strategic housing team and will proactively work to bring those sites forward. And I know that the officer on this particular site has been in constant discussions with the RP to make sure that happens. So, and that will happen once every development we have is the development officer will bring those sites forward with the registered provider.
Thank you. I had one other question around the increase in the housing since COVID, where you said there's been a 100% increase since COVID in the 1,957 households that are currently waiting. Are we an outlier in Herefordshire with that level of increase, or is that something that's sort of, that in your experience, is happening nationwide?
No, that is happening nationwide. It isn't just solely Herefordshire. Figures across the nation have increased almost by double since pre-pandemic levels.
I'm not saying that makes me feel any better, but it's at least it's not something that's because of any actions or inactions on our part. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go Councillor Baker, Councillor Davis, Councillor Cornthwaite.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a question regarding housing associations. I'm assuming they're what you call RPs, registered providers. I'm wondering how much authority we have over them. I'm thinking of evidence of mismanagement on their behalf. When we as members take it forward, where do we take it for a start? I've been told by officers here that they have no authority over housing associations. And so we have people who are in RPs paying good rent, but there's mismanagement on behalf of the association, and nothing seems to be able to be done about it. I just wondered, is that something you've come across, or do we just have to swallow it?
Whoever you have spoken to in the council is correct. We have no legal jurisdiction over any RP. We are solely reliant on them working with us by goodwill rather than any regulation. Any issues around the property, the management of a property, would need to go through a formal complaints process. And then if the outcome of that complaint wasn't satisfactory, then there is the housing ombudsman that we would direct people to. But that person's right. We don't have any authority over any RP, which is why we have struggled to either bring RPs on board in terms of our accommodation or when working with them for accommodation.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. We have, as has been quoted, 1,957 households that are awaiting, I take it, that's social housing. And on the social housing register as such, how many of these are currently in social housing that are awaiting an upgrade per se? So if, for argument's sake, a couple had a child and have another child and therefore require a bigger facility, bigger property, they would require a move. So of these 1,957, do we have an understanding of how many of them are already in social housing and just require a change for maybe employment or family circumstances or medical?
We will have. I don't have those figures to hand, but I can certainly share them with the committee. It is worth noting that if people are in suitable accommodation already, they would probably be placed in our lowest band, which is a band E. What I can do for you is furnish the committee with a report of the total number of households, the banding that they're in, and also the types of accommodation. So is it a social provider? Is it private rented that they're in? Are they staying with parents? All of that. So I can break all of that down for you for ready for the next meeting.
That'd be very useful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Cornthwaite.
Again, it was relating to the housing providers, and having listened to what you've said to Councillor Baker, I wonder if I was going to ask, are we able to audit the housing providers and check that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? I'll let you answer the question. But the other thing was, with the housing providers, do they give our own county residents priority over providing them with a house? And I do notice that on an area in my own ward, it does seem that that particular housing provider can fetch in troubled families from other counties so that they're away from their situation in their own county. Is there a percentage that we have to think, well, we've got to absorb that when a housing provider gets involved?
So we do have 80% nomination rights with most of the RPs in Herefordshire. There is a slight variation depending on the number of properties they bring forward for us. But they will have their own, as I alluded to previously, they have their own allocation policies, and within that might be moving people internally within their own stock, might be for domestic abuse reasons, it might be fear of harm or risk if they were to remain in their own property or own area, so they will move them out of area. But we do have a nominations agreement with each provider, which will allocate to people with a local connection to Herefordshire. I can't address the individual points that you've raised without knowing who they are in terms of bringing people out of county, but anybody on the housing register would need to demonstrate a local connection to the area.
Thank you, Sarah. I was hoping Councillor Gandhi might be joining us, but I don't. She's not here as yet. I think it's customary for us to formulate any conclusions, recommendations that we might want to make on this particular topic. And I'm going to suggest that we have a brief adjournment while we formulate that before we move on to the next item. Because I do feel as if, rather than just background, there might be one or two actions that we want to come out of this particular section of the meeting. So what I'd like us to do is to suspend the feed just for 5 minutes while we formulate those particular. Yes. Sorry, Sarah. Did you want to say something else?
I just didn't respond to the question regarding the audit of RPs.
Oh,
The
sorry.
question raised. So no, that's fine. So we're not able to audit them. However, there is a social housing regulator who can audit them.
Thank you.
Councillor Hitchener?
Yeah, sorry, just kind of for the record a little bit. You mentioned, Chair, the increase in homeless in houses on the waiting list from 1,957. The 100% increase is actually in respect of 120 households in the form of temporary accommodation arranged by the local authority, which is a 100% increase. So in a way, it's kind of good news, the 100% increase. This is the ability of the council to find temporary accommodation. There's been an increase in demand, but you've managed to fulfill that demand, I think. So it's kind of good that you've worked so hard to achieve that. Am I looking for good news where it's only bad? But I think the point is about the 1957. How has that increased since COVID? And how do we compare with other councils? And that's something which will probably come out in the info. But I just wanted to clarify where the 100% increase came from. Thank you.
Do you want to come back on that, Sarah?
So the 100% increase is as a result of the pre-pandemic. So we've had people approach us, more people than ever, and that is increasing year on year. So I don't think we can blame the pandemic, but it certainly was a catalyst for people presenting as homeless to us, and that's the 120 homeless households. The 1957 is purely people that have applied to the housing register for whatever reason they need to. I would need to get figures from the difficulty we have is we have done what we've called a cull of our system a number of years ago. So anybody who registered before then, we wrote to them and told them they were inactive, so we were excluding them. So people have slowly been applying. So I'm not so sure if that will give you a great indication, because we did do a piece of work and we will probably do another piece of work in line with a new provider that we're taking on in November. So I do expect to see those figures come down for inactive applicants for over 12 months. So that's likely to come down by November. So I'm happy to give you another figure at that point when we're ready to go live on a new allocation system for people to use.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up shortly. But Sarah, if I gave you a very small magic wand, what would you use it to achieve?
For me, I think it's accommodation. I think we need accommodation, both in terms of temporary accommodation that we're not able to source, and so we're sourcing it through very expensive chain hotels, etc., and B&Bs. If we had a accommodation where we could support people to sustain tenancies and therefore demonstrate to RPs that they can sustain a tenancy and then go out into the social sector or the private sector and demonstrating that they can do that. So it's kind of twofold. It's that emergency accommodation I think we need, but I also think moving people through that accommodation into more settled accommodation is a huge blocker for us, and the only outcome I can see is that we need more housing.
Okay, thank you very much. I think what I'm going to suggest is that we take a 5-minute break. We just come up with a couple of recommendations. So we'll suspend the feed for 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next. We'll state what those recommendations are. Then we'll move on to the next item in the agenda. Thank you very much. That was a very useful presentation, Sarah, and I thank you for your time and your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we suspend the feed, please? Thank you. Apologies to anybody who's been waiting for us to restart. I'm sorry if we're a couple of minutes late, but we've had a very healthy discussion while we have come up with a draft recommendation, which I will now read out, which is to prepare a report for the committee by the end of September, providing more detail on the issues raised in this meeting, including options to increase the delivery of social and affordable housing. Can I have a proposer for this particular motion? Councillor Hitchener and a seconder. Councillor Davis. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. That's passed. Right, we will move on to the next item agenda, which is the Public Realms Future Operating Model Working Group Terms of Reference. And the purpose of this particular item is to determine whether to form a committee working group to scrutinise development of the Public Realm Future Operating Model. I'm happy to... Councillor Gandy, you've just arrived. No, I think you're also down for the future operating model, but just as an attendee, you don't wish to talk about it. That's fine. No, that's fine. No problem at all. That's fine. Thank you, Councillor Gandy. Much appreciated. As I say, I think we. As we're all aware, there's a consultation happening across the summer, and the report will be coming back. And there has been some discussion around whether we should, well, there's a proposal that we should form a working group in order to scrutinise the report that comes back in. Does one of the officers just want to briefly touch on what this report will be, just for those people that are watching on the live stream, so that they're up to speed?
Thank you, Councillor Driscoll.
No, thank you, Mark.
So the future operating model, as we were referring to in the past, just to give a bit of background, Balfour Beatty started our contract with us in 2013. It's run now for 11 years or so. And in the previous administration, with cross-party support, we were looking at changing the scope of that contract. However, legal advice was that we were looking to change it too drastically to allow a lawful change to contract. So working with colleagues within the services across the council, we have looked now to develop a whole new contract to go to tender for a contract start date in June 2026. So in previous meetings with Cabinet and Council, we have had decisions to terminate the contract with BBLP on May 31st, 2026, with a no-fault clause in the contract. So because we couldn't do what we wanted to do via a contract change, we've had to go down the route of getting a new contract. We're due to start soft market testing in the next week or so. So we have our first event on Tuesday morning in Hereford. And part of that will be helping us to shape what we're looking to deliver with the market. So we've already got our ideas as to what that looks like, but what we need to do is make sure that the market is willing to come to the table to look to contract with us on that. So part of that work will come out of that will be to reshape our thinking as a consequence of the soft market testing, and then bring a report to Cabinet in November for us to go out to tender in January. We'd welcome that opportunity from Scrutiny to preview those ideas to make sure we're on the right track for council. We've had a working group in the past, a cross-party working group, and I see this as adding to that work.
That's very helpful. Any questions from, yes, Councillor Baker?
Just briefly, I'm just wondering if when this new tender goes out, I don't know what the terms are for this, the phrasings, but will Balfour Beatty be allowed to submit a tender to restart again in 2026 under the new terms of reference?
So the contract will be open to all contractors that qualify under the relevant sections of what we're looking for a contractor. So as a tier 1 term maintenance contractor, public realm service contractor, yes, they can resubmit and rebid for the contract.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Hitchener.
Yes, I looked at this and I thought, well, what a brilliant idea. You know, why not have some input before Cabinet has it? And you know, it's too good to be true, kind of thing. I'm trying to work out what the disadvantage might be. That there's some trick here that's being played. That I guess it doesn't stop any decision being called in afterwards, anything like that. It's just a matter of working together. But perhaps you could just confirm to me that I'm not having the wool pulled out of my eyes. So, Mark, sorry about that.
Merry Christmas.
I promise we're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. The purpose of doing it is to make sure we've got that cross-party support for what we're looking to do. It's a very important contract. It affects every single resident in Herefordshire and every single person that travels through Herefordshire. So really important that as a council, we're all behind it and not just a small element of the council.
I'd like to thank Daniel and the officers. We went out, we've had meetings beforehand, and the discussion was along the lines of how can we help you to deliver what you're trying to deliver as best as we possibly can. And this is one of the ideas that came out of those discussions.
And Chair, I wonder whether I could just comment on Councillor Baker's observation. I mean, to my mind, I do hope that Balfour Beatty will want this contract. That they will desperately want to continue it. But the general population may think they made a right mess of it. But if we have been at fault ourselves in the way we've run the contract, and I think there's a real opportunity for Balfour Beatty to sharpen their pencils, for us to get a really good contract with them. And if there is continuity from one supplier to another, a lot of the issues which raise on a sort of a change actually go away. So, but personally, I'd be saying, Balfour Beatty, please come to the table. Please show what you can do for us, and show over the next 18 months or two years that you deserve it. That they'll do really good work for us as a council, and that they'll go away with really positive things happening. So Councillor Baker and I perhaps differ very differently on it, but that would certainly be my approach.
Thank you, Councillor Hitchener. So, the objectives. Any other questions for Mark or for Ross? Yeah, Councillor Davies.
Thank you. How are we going to make sure in the future that the criticisms that were levelled against Balfour Beatty for certain areas of maintenance and what have you doesn't occur again? And I suppose that involves us having more staff on as in council officers who can oversee and communicate concerns with the provider. I mean, and following on from that, there will be obviously an increased cost to us as a council to have officers in place who can then look at the contract and make sure it's being fulfilled correctly.
So at the moment, the entire service is effectively delivered by Balfour Beatty. So from works inspection, works creation, job completion, job evaluation at the end, if you like, and then obviously we pay the bill via our contract management team. The new contract will be what we refer to as a simple term maintenance contract. So it will be a provider of services to deliver works on the highway. It won't be a blend of professional services, locality services. It will just be delivering works. So all the people that are currently your locality stewards or the designers working for Balfour at Thorn will come across to the council under TUPE arrangements. So whilst there'll be an increased cost in terms of some elements, the net effect of what we've looked at so far is actually there'll be a cost saving. So there will be no more man marking there is currently. So locality stewards should still go out and check work that's been completed by the operatives. That same locality stewards can still go out and check work that's been done by the operatives. So we'll still have those checks and balances in the system.
Thank you for that. Are we going to increase the number of locality stewards? I happen to know that in my particular ward, my locality steward covers multiple areas, and there's very little, how can I put it, he's very stretched in what he does, and consequently in future I think it would be easier if we had locality stewards that had a set area that of maybe by mileage or something similar. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
So at this present moment in time, the locality stewards are funded a mix of revenue and capital. You're obviously aware revenue is very difficult for the council to come by, and the more we spend on people, the less we'll spend on repairs on the ground. So we've got that balance to strike somewhere. What we'll need to do when in the interim period between now and when we bring them over in at the end of May 2026, is look at their areas and look at the demands on their time. Look at what they're doing, how many street works openings there are, how many different elements of work they're doing, to make sure there's some comparator that says, well, actually, the locality steward that looks after Hereford is really busy because there's lots of people live in Hereford, but actually the locality steward that works down the Golden Valley, he'll have a bigger patch, so potentially more mileage of road, but the level of inquiries and the level of interaction will be similar to what he has in Hereford. So they'll still have the same workload. One will be travelling around the countryside, one will be focused in the city. It's work I've done in previous authorities, and it's worked quite well in terms of making sure that there's equitability for the staff.
Thanks, Mark. That's useful. I let that run. I am aware we're kind of going a little bit off topic in that we are just trying to set up the working group to review all of this. And these are questions I think that might well come out, or we might be teasing these out later in the year when we do look at the final FOM. So just to recap, the group will be aiming to evaluate any changes to the proposed operating model following the market engagement exercise. We'll appraise the findings of the market testing exercise and the viability of any future operating model in the marketplace. We'll report and make recommendations to the Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee for consideration for presentation to Cabinet on the 24th of October 2024. So when we're saying we're setting up a working group, we are the working group, so it will be all members of this committee, unless anybody has an objection to that, but I do feel that would be appropriate. And we'll be looking to meet early in October, and we will be setting that date in our work programme in the next agenda item, as I understand it. So I think if everybody's happy, do we need to take a vote to make sure that we're happy to set up this working group? Right. I'm happy to propose we set up the working group as outlined with the papers, with the terms of reference as circulated. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Davis. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We will be setting up a working group and we will feed back on the report in due course. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you. We'll move on to item 9, which is the work programme. And I'm going to hand over to Daniel Webb, our Statutory Scrutiny Officer, who's going to do a brief introduction around the work programme.
Thank you very much, Chair. Presented to you is a paper outlining a draft work programme for the period from today till the 12th of March, that being proposed as the final meeting of this committee in this municipal year before annual council in May. At the moment, we're proposing in October that we meet, sorry, I'll start again. We're proposing that we move our meeting in September. This is because of the housing market work that you're doing at the moment around registered providers and, around housing delivery models. That work won't be ready until the 27th of September, which obviously is too late for the planned meeting in September. What we're also mindful as well, of course, is that we have this now agreed working group as a committee looking at the future operating model. So obviously we need to have that work plus plus the report from officers around local authority delivery models, and we need all of that ready for your next meeting, which will be, so we'll have to move that meeting to October. Now, if you want to report to Cabinet on the 24th of October, the latest that we can do that meeting is the 15th of October. So what officers are proposing is that we hold the working group on the 8th of October, and that we hold your next committee meeting on the 15th of October. That will give me enough time to write up the findings from your working group and publish that, albeit slightly late, for the meeting on the 15th. It also provides you with enough time to consider the report from officers around housing delivery models. And then it also gives you, or it gives us as officers overnight enough time to prepare those reports to present those recommendations to Cabinet on the 24th of October. So in a nutshell, we're proposing 8th of October for your working group meeting, 15th of October for your next committee meeting, moving it for September. And then in the October meeting, as detailed in the paper, we should have the findings from your working group around local authority housing delivery models, plus the report that's been agreed in our recommendations today, expanding on the introduction that you've had today, plus the housing delivery model report and your findings from that. And your recommendation to that to go through to Cabinet on 24th. So that's the proposal as it stands at the moment. There are other items for your committee meetings in November, January and March. My apologies. So that's the proposal that's put there. There are future items in November around enterprise zones, which you as a committee I think will need to do just a little bit more work on shaping, so I can present that a brief to officers in time for that meeting. And similarly for the item in January, where we're proposing, in March, where we're proposing to look at highways maintenance again, just a bit more work to shape that going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for Daniel, please, based on that as a draft work programme? Yes, Councillor Hitchener.
Sorry, Chair, I keep on butting in. The enterprise zone item here, evidence required is to be confirmed. So what I'd like to know is to identify the economic and employment benefits arising not only from businesses moving into the enterprise zone, but also the release of other land that's become available in the county as a result of them moving out of other industrial premises. It's something I've mentioned to the person who had been running the enterprise zone and other people, and I think it'd be very useful data for us to see. And then we had a swap report provided to the Audit and Governance Committee, and I think that's part of the evidence, and I'd like that to be looked at by this committee as well. And then attendees, I just wondered whether it would be worth asking the people who have chaired the Enterprise Zone Board to come along and explain things, ask questions from us. There are two people there. There's Bill Jackson, I think. Bill would, I'm sure, love to join us, and the other is Andrew Manning-Cox, who might be worthwhile asking. And the other person might be someone who's involved in Ross, so we can be asking them, how the plans for the enterprise zone, or how it's worked well, how it might transfer to Ross. So we're looking a little bit ahead. There might be some surveyor or business person in Ross who'd be worth getting along to talk about it.
I can investigate that. There's a few people I think who are keenly interested.
Councillor Hitchener, you just mentioned two people there. I was busy typing, so I didn't catch where they're from. Could you just repeat that?
Bill Jackson is a local charter surveyor.
No,
Jackson's the state agent, yes. So I think he was chair of the enterprise zone when it started. And the other is Andrew Manning-Cox, who was the chair for the last 4 years.
So we are agreeing that we're going to go for enterprise zones recommendations and how that feeds into Ross for the 13th of November. When you say we need more shaping, Daniel, for this, are we giving you sufficient shaping here, or would you welcome the opportunity of another meeting?
I think we can either do this. I think it would be useful to meet every now and then anyway, just to discuss work programmes. What other committees do quite often is they'll meet a week before the meeting just to sort of shape their lines of inquiry for the meeting, just to provide a little bit of structure. What we could do is you could always extend those meetings just a touch to look forward to future meetings and have a little bit more discussion around what work you want, what evidence you want to receive in those meetings, so they could form two functions then. I think that sort of regular Teams-based half an hour, 45 minutes, just touching in would be very useful to help provide structure to your to this committee.
Councillor Baker?
think we need to be careful when we're inviting external people to come along and advise on things like this enterprise zone. It's too important to get the wrong advice. The two people that David mentioned are unknown to me, and possibly my colleagues. I don't know, but I don't know really how what other form you can use to actually invite people along. The person I suppose that should be invited is the chairman of Ross Town Council, because I mean he's an elected person, so he can't be criticised too much. But the two people that David has mentioned, there could be people outside saying, "Oh, it's just your mates," and this sort of stuff, you know. So
I'm sure that isn't the case, Councillor Baker. I think what might be useful is if we circulate between ourselves ideas for people that we feel would bring value to that meeting, and then I think possibly at the beginning of September we have a brief Teams meeting just to discuss the work programme for November. I'm loathed to extend the meetings on either the 18th or the 15th because I think we're going to be pretty full on. We've got a lot to look at around the housing and the operating model. But I don't see any problem with having a work programme forming Teams meeting, once we're all back in September, just to discuss who we might want to include and what we might want to see for the November and January meeting. So if everybody's in agreement with that, and then if people want to circulate ideas for who they would like to attend in advance of that, we can have a healthy Teams discussion around that on that day. Okay? Yeah, Councillor Toynbee.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just moving on to a general comment about the work programme. Is that yeah, for the future operating model work, I don't know if this is just me, but in some places I've got it as a task and finish group, and in other places as a working group, but I think they don't operate in the same way.
I'm going to hand over to Daniel. This was discussed. Working group.
Yeah, mea culpa. That's my lack of attention to detail that's causing that. For the camera, for the record, I'm proposing for ease of administration and to make sure that this work stays coherent within the committee, that we form a working group rather than a task and finish group.
Thank you. Do we need to set a date for that now, or can we?
Well,
can I get Ben to circulate some possible?
Ben's just suggested to me on the side that obviously the meeting on the 11th of September is still in your diaries, so none of you should in theory have commitments on that date. So perhaps rather than having a 3-hour committee meeting here in Plough Lane, perhaps a 45-minute Teams meeting on the 11th of September, since it's there. Fair enough.
You can join from Menorca. You can join a Teams meeting from Menorca. We can just all look at your tan and be extremely jealous. But anyway, well, so is everyone happy with the 11th? Yeah. So okay, let's put that in the diary as a Teams meeting to discuss the future work programme. Okay, great.
We'll do the necessary on those 3 dates then.
And please, between now and then, people do have a think about, as far as the enterprise zone is concerned, who we might like to. Discussing enterprise, who we might like to invite and who we think would bring value to those meetings. Because I do want to make sure that we, as much as possible moving forward, include external voices. I want to hear from external voices within this committee. Okay, thank you. Do we need to vote on that work programme then?
Please.
Okay. Well, the work programme as it currently stands, do we have I'm happy to propose the work programme. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Owens? All those in favour? Okay, so that work programme is carried. Thank you very much. I'm of a mind that we're reaching the end of this meeting, are we not? Is there anything I haven't
Chair,
covered?
just to confirm the date of the next formal meeting then is Tuesday the 15th of October at 2 p.m. Obviously we'll also collect the details about the private briefings and working groups on the 11th of September and the 8th of October in due course, but the next formal meeting indeed will be the 15th of October.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, so the next formal meeting will be the 15th of October. Thank you, everybody that's either joined us online or in person today. Can we stop the live stream, please? I declare this meeting